Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar entitled Creating Inclusive Organisations. Thank you so much for your interest in this topic. It shows your dedication to human rights, equal opportunity, and caring for people that perhaps might be on the margins of our society or at risk of not being able to access the services that they have the right to access. My name's Lisa Trebuzio, and I'm the manager of the Centre for Culture, Diversity and Ageing, and we're really excited to be able to present this webinar in partnership with Margaret Tuema, the Diversity and Inclusion Specialist at Uniting NSW.ACT. Margaret's done amazing work in this field and being instrumental in the development of their diversity and inclusion strategy at Uniting. So we're really happy to be able to give you an example of some of the work that this organisation is doing in the field. The Centre for Culture, Diversity and Ageing is funded by the Department of Health. And our broad vision is that all aged care consumers in Australia experience accessible care. Some of the things that we do is diversity coaching and mentoring for the aged care sector, resources and practice guides to promote inclusive practice. And of course, we've got our inclusive service standards, which have been recognised by the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission. We always like to celebrate good practice and recognise inclusive approaches within the aged care sector. So we have our Excellence Awards coming up, and we're just about to launch our good practice stories on our website. Of course, if you do have a good practice story, let us know. And of course, we are part of the Partners in Culturally Appropriate Care program. Apologies if you've already heard this a million times from our other webinars. But for all the new people, that's the centre. So feel free to contact us anytime. So a little bit about the presentation today. Inclusive practice in aged care. What does it actually mean and why do we need it? Sometimes there's a lot of rhetoric in this kind of field, but we're going to unpack what it means. Our inclusive service standards that the Centre for Culture, Diversity and Ageing developed in 2018, what are they? And how can you learn from them as a framework to achieve inclusive practice? And our Stories to Inspire arm as part of the Centre for Culture, Diversity and Ageing, which will be the case study from Margaret. So we're always looking for more stories to inspire. Our Stories to Inspire section came from our recent conference where we celebrated inspirational journeys. And of course, she'll be talking about their diversity and inclusion strategy. Okay, so when we talk about inclusion, it basically means that services are able to adapt and be responsible to the community so that people feel safe to access the service, that the service is accessible and the service is welcoming and people can be their authentic self. Now, that's easier said than done, we know, because, of course, you all have your everyday, work lives. You've got lots of things to respond to. Often it's reactive, perhaps, reacting to circumstances. And sometimes things just happen organically. But we want to talk about that inclusivity is an actual concept that we want to talk about, and it relates to diversity, equity and inclusion. So when we talk about welcoming, safe and accessible environments, we talk about the idea that the diversity of every individual is actually acknowledged, celebrated, respected, and incorporated within your organisation. It's also being able to have the knowledge to address some of the barriers that people might have to access your knowledge and services and policies and procedures. Because if you don't do that, systemic discrimination can occur. And under the Aged Care Act, of course, we have to recognise diversity groups, because if we don't recognise it, it can lead to indirect discrimination and a breach of human rights. So it's actually essential to recognise inclusive practice, because therefore some people, some communities or individuals may sustain their privileges, whilst others may have further disadvantage. And we see that through a lot of research happening, for example, in cold communities and dementia care, for example, the exclusion of cold stories, people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds and their stories in the dementia research field. We see it in Aboriginal deaths in custody. We see it with the Black Lives Matter movement, the highest suicide rate amongst LGBTIQA plus trans people, for example. And then we talk about disability, that's a whole other field. So if we don't consider the complexity of diversity groups that are outlined in the aged care diversity framework, we are essentially practicing indirect discrimination. This is a really important topic, and it is recognised. We just had a co-design webinar with the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission, and they're very interested to continue this discussion. And of course, the Australian government's $17 billion budget has also got diversity and inclusion in there. So it's important for quality of care, consumer-directed care, etc., and choice of control. So what are the building blocks of an inclusive approach? The three concepts that we want to talk about just more broadly are diversity, equity and inclusion, are the three kind of concepts that oversee the idea of inclusivity and equal opportunity. So when we talk about equity, equity doesn't necessarily relate to equality. It relates to fairness and justice. It's about recognising that certain people may have disadvantage and trying to find solutions to some of the attitudes or barriers or behaviours that create inequality. So in order to be fair, it is necessary to treat people differently, but not discriminately. It's more to treat people for their own unique circumstances. But it doesn't necessarily mean disadvantaging anyone. It's about recognising that we don't always start from an equal playing field or on the same starting line. Diversity as a concept encompasses the characteristics that make up all of us. So these characteristics permeate the way we individually experience the world, the way we identify ourselves, our life experiences, and a range of different characteristics which I'll be talking about now. So excuse me if you already know about these concepts, but it's always good to revisit what diversity actually means. Let's have a look at things like family roles. As you know, upon migration, some people may change their family roles from being the leader of a family to being dependent on their children. Imagine an older person having dependency on their own child, what that might feel like. And that happened in my own family with my grandfather, because I'm from an Italian-Slovenian background, and he was a leader in Italy. He was a police officer. And he came to Australia and, of course, had to depend on my father. But in saying that, he also was the leader of his social club. So he tried to sustain that leadership role. But with having an English language barrier, it was very hard for him in his journey in Australia. Things like age, someone from 70 is going to be very different to someone who's 95. As you know that, I don't need to point that out. Physical appearance, professional identity, income, sexual identity, temperament and personality, ideologies and political views, beliefs around ageing, beliefs around end of life, our life experiences, our suburban identity, et cetera, and of course our ethnic identity and spiritual identity, just to name a few. And of course, these can overlap, of course, that's where intersectionality comes into it. And, we use this word a lot. Here's another jargon word, but it's important to be able to understand that, if you're a woman, for example, and you're from an Islamic faith and you're a carer and you're 95, you're going to have a lot of your own unique experience to if you're an 80-year-old man who's got a disability and is gay. So all those intersections make up a person's life. And we encourage you to think about your own intersections as well and your own diversity characteristics and how power and privilege might play out in your interactions with your clients. So what do we mean by inclusion? So we've talked about diversity and diversity characteristics and equity, which is disadvantage and perhaps having barriers to inclusion. But what is actual inclusion? How do we visualise that? It's a positive action, so it's an active thing to do to help people to be to participate and be represented in the party. So you've got a party, you've got diversity in the party, but someone can sit in the corner in that party and everyone else on the dance floor. How do you get that person on the dance floor? It's where people feel welcome and to be able to move freely and to be able to express themselves freely. And that's where creating inclusive services and environments are very important, rather than just having it as a nice thing to do on the side or as we'll do it when we've got time to do it. I wanted to touch upon the idea of risk and protective factors to inclusion because it's important to understand who may be missing out on your service as well, who may be excluded from your service, or who may feel excluded within your service. So, for example, we've had stories of people that are living in residential care facilities who are the only person that speaks a language other than English in that residential care facility, has led to extreme social isolation and staying in their room for a long period of time, not being able to have access to multilingual media resources or connections to international, family members, or they're things that are significant to them or important to them. Could you imagine being in a room, if this is your home, and you don't understand what's around you and you're approaching end-of-life care? And, of course, adding COVID onto that. So in terms of the risk factors, there's that social isolation that I just mentioned, poverty and disadvantage of living with a disability, having a history of discrimination based on your age, your race, your sexuality, your disability, a history of trauma, of course, the stolen generations, the forgotten Australians, including the Maltese community and Anglo community, and, of course, the British migrants. We've got the, people from having a refugee experience, people who are currently in domestic violence situations or experiencing elder abuse. Do we know? Are they going to disclose to you whether this is happening to them? How do we create a welcoming environment so they can say, you know what, I've got something to tell you, I'm being abused? And, of course, that comes down to trust and rapport, very important. Of course, English language barriers, health literacy barriers, digital exclusion, and et cetera, et cetera. And, of course, the flip side to that are the protective factors. So if you come across a client and they're financially secure, they're socially connected, they're able-bodied, they haven't really had a history of discrimination, they've got lots of positive relationships in their life, they speak English, they can read, they can access the internet, they can jump in a car or catch public transport, they're in safe and secure housing, they are able to communicate, and they don't really have any caring responsibilities, and they have the availability of inclusive services in their community. It's going to be a very different experience to all the number of risk factors that people might have on the left-hand side column. So this is just a bit of a reflective, slide to have a think about when you come across an older person. Where would they be on that scale? In terms of the legal framework and the policy framework overseeing inclusive practice, I thought I'd just have a bit of a high-level overview of some of the legislation and other things to consider within the Australian context and the international context. So legally, we've got these some of the acts to consider as it relates to inclusive practice in aged care. Of course, the Aged Care Act, Age Discrimination Act, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're wanting to draft a diversity and inclusion strategy, these are some of the acts that you can mention that support your work. The moral argument for inclusive practice improves quality of life and contributes to a greater society, a more inclusive society, a more peaceful society, hopefully. Socially, an argument is that it's fair, it's just, it's respectful, it's just the right thing to do. In terms of national approaches, of course, we've got the Department of Health's Aged Care Diversity Framework, the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission through the Aged Care Quality Standard mentions diversity and inclusion, especially in Standard 1. And we've got a number of sector committees which focus on diversity and inclusion. So there is targeted responses to this topic. In terms of organisational development, increase in innovation and productivity, consumer satisfaction, and it really helps with your reputation as a provider. And, of course, minimises risk and ensures compliance around discrimination in the workplace, for example, or complaints. And globally, well, let's have a think about what's happening globally on this scale. We've got the World Health Organization age-friendly cities, for example, World Health Organization social determinants of health, which include the importance of inclusivity, inclusive practice, for example, and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development of the United Nations Principles for Older Persons. So currently there's no legislation on the rights of older persons. There's a treaty, but there's no formal legislation. So they're working towards actually an act around older persons. In terms of the Aged Care Diversity Framework, again, excuse me if you already know about this framework, 2017, and of course it works on a number of strategies and actions to help you to consider some of the approaches that you might use in diversity inclusion in your workforce. And these are the diversity groups to consider targeting your responses towards it, depending on your local community. And Margaret's going to be talking about some of the diversity groups that Uniting have sort of chosen to focus on in their work based on this. The Australian government has also got the action plans for 3 groups: culturally and linguistically diverse people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and gender diverse intersectional elders. In those resources, you can learn from different strategies and actions to support your work in creating a more equitable environment for these groups of people or for these communities. And of course, everyone's unique. We know that. But there's also trends around why people from these communities may be disadvantaged or at risk of disadvantage. So if you read those resources, you'll be able to get some really good tips and strategies. And those strategies have been created based on consultation with peak bodies and community leaders and consumers. So we're going to talk now about a whole of organisation approach to inclusive practice, and that's where the Centre for Cultural Diversity and Ageing comes into it. So as I mentioned before, often diversity and inclusion is considered a nice thing to do or an add-on thing to do, but we actually sort of argue quite differently to that. We think it should be core business, and of course, if you look at the Royal Commission recommendations, one of them is to try to embed human rights and diversity inclusion into core business in aged care. So we are supported, it's being supported nationally. And it must start from the top down. It must start from the leaders. So what are the inclusive service standards? The inclusive service standards were developed in 2018 by the Centre to assist aged care organisations to become better equipped at addressing the diversity needs of their consumers and journeying towards inclusive practice. And of course, it never ends. Some people at the very beginning, some are quite advanced, and some don't know where to start. So that's what we're here for. There's 3 standards. The first one is commitment to inclusive services, and that is commitment from the leaders. We need commitment from the board level, senior leaders, and executive level, at the executive level. Standard 2 is then developing systems to support those inclusive services. And standard 3 is building the capacity and capability of your workforce to be able to be equipped to understand and to respond to diversity in the community. So in terms of standard 1, commitment to inclusive services, the overarching aim is that the organisation clearly articulates its commitment to building an environment which responds to consumer diversity and embeds inclusive service provision across all of its systems. So how does your organisation actually say that it cares about diversity rather than it being blended in and saying, we care for everyone, we care for everyone, we care for everyone, which we hear all the time? We have to explicitly mention diversity and inclusion, because if you say we care for everyone, that's important, but it's also very important to mention how you're caring for those that may miss out. So some of the suggestions here in terms of some strategies that we suggest, so things or reflections perhaps are, does your organisation have a diversity inclusion strategy? And sorry, I forgot to mention at the bottom here is for you to start reflecting on where your organisation may be at. So do you think, no, we don't have a strategy, we're inactive, we're reacting to the environment around this, we're being proactive about it, we're progressive or actually at best practice? And that scale at the bottom has actually been used by the Global Diversity and Inclusion Benchmark. So we've used some of the global standards here to understand this sort of approach. The second one is diversity and inclusion a commitment by your leaders and board members? Do they say it? Do they like it? Do they care for it? Do they mention it to you everywhere, or sometimes or never? Is diversity and inclusion embedded in your strategic plan, mission statements, annual reports, and other collateral within your organisation? And do you have an actual committee? Do you have a working group that is continuously talking about this and looking at monitoring and evaluation and continuous improvement, and with people who are committed to the topic? The second one is developing systems that support inclusive services. So this means that the organisation designs and implements inclusive services based on evidence derived from organisational reviews and consultations. So this is the the core element of what you're doing every day. So you've got the commitment from the leaders, which holds the space, and now you've got everything that you do in between. And it's a very complex understanding or way to sort of talk about this simply. You can't. And that's why in our inclusive service standards, we have 16 performance measures to kind of have to start to reflect on where you're at. But again, in terms of some of the reflections, does your organisation monitor and compare diversity of its consumers to the diversity of the community to identify and address service gaps? So how do you collect data on diversity? So do you collect data on people that have languages other than English? Do you collect data on people's migration journey? Do you have data on whether people identify as Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander? Do you know the local demographic of migration trends within your local community? Do you know if there's any newly arrived families and language groups, and what does that mean? Does your organisation have policies and procedures that consider diversity and inclusion in screening, assessment and care planning? Now, this is, again, another complex topic, but when people come to your organisation and they're the first point of call and there's an assessment made or a care plan done, are your staff equipped to understand how to ask questions in a culturally sensitive manner? Do they understand how to support that person's unique needs as it relates to cultural safety? Do they know how to use interpreters effectively? Do they know how to understand the stigma and discrimination on certain topics around incontinence supports or dementia care or mental health? Does your organisation collaborate and seek input with special needs groups, as we mentioned from the Age Care Diversity Framework, and peak bodies to co-design some of the inclusive procedures that you want to address? So rather than it just being an insular thing of what you do in your organisation, have you collaborated with your local migrant resource centre or gone out to the Islamic community leader or the Jewish community leader or whoever and go, I want to do a project with you, I want to co-design, I want you to look at the language, we're going to get funding to perhaps support you with the work, whatever it might be. Does your organisation have inclusive consumer feedback policies where consumers actively participate in the planning, monitoring and evaluation of your service? So when it comes to consumer feedback, how have you adopted a range of different methods to get feedback from your consumers? Have you considered health literacy barriers, language barriers? Have you considered the fact that they might have Parkinson, they can't write, that they might be scared to say something to you because they will feel that they're going to get in trouble, that their privacy or confidentiality is at risk, because in their country of origin, if you give feedback to the government, you get hurt. So have you considered all these things? And lastly, standard 3 is capacity building for inclusive practice. And this is where the organisation's management staff are equipped with knowledge, skills and resources to plan and deliver inclusive services. So again, supporting your staff, supporting the workforce. And we know, again, massive topic. And I guess every organisation is going to have their own unique challenges around the workforce. We know that sometimes the languages of the staff don't necessarily match the languages of the consumers in some residential care facilities. We have, a lot of changes that have happened in the workforce with COVID. So we're quite aware of that. But our stance is, how do we help people to understand approaches to cultural sensitivity and be sensitive to the needs of their diverse consumers? And to do that, you need to have an all of organisation diversity and inclusion training approach, an induction approach, and also how you recruit for people. Are you openly committed to diversity and inclusion in your recruitment? Do you advertise for your roles across a number of different platforms? For example, recently with the centre, we are now open to we've got two new roles at the centre, and I've been able to reach out to people and advertise the roles in different faith communities and different culturally and linguistically diverse communities and settlement providers as well. Does your organisation provide ongoing information and training on diversity and inclusion? So things like cross-cultural communication, working with interpreters, diversity and inclusion in aged care at large, consumer-directed care, and cultural safety. So let us know if you need help with this, because we can help you develop a training calendar as well, if you like, because some of the topics are quite overwhelming and quite loaded. Does your organisation actually track the diversity data of your actual staff? Do you know the diversity of your staff? We have, and whether they feel a sense of belonging. And we actually have a example diversity and inclusion staff survey for you available on our website if you wanted to have a go at that, or if you're already doing that, let us know. And do you have a budget? Now, of course, this always comes down to the budget, because often people say we don't have a budget for translations. Translations not included in the government contracts. Yes, we know that, and we've been listening to that. We've been trying to link people to multilingual resources, or we've got our consumer feedback forms in 12 languages, for example. But how do you factor that in your new financial year, or with your finance teams? How do you go, okay, let's put a budget here for diversity, which might include some co-design approaches, it might include some translations, it might include a diversity coordinator role. You know, let's have a think about it from the very beginning so it's incorporated within our organisation. So enough about that, enough me talking. Let's now introduce Uniting's New South Wales ACT Diversity and Inclusion Strategy for 2020-2023. I just got a quote from them because I was quite impressed with their work. And one of the quotes was, at Uniting, we don't just care about diversity and inclusion because it's the right thing to do. Diversity and inclusion is part of our identity and the future we see for ourselves. Again, incorporate into the mindsets and attitudes of the whole organisational culture. So Uniting ACT New South Wales is a large non-government organisation providing a range of services, including aged care. Their diversity inclusion strategy was launched in September 2020, and adopts a whole-of-organisation approach to diversity. The strategy has commitment from the CEO and the board, and is communicated across Australia on its website and social media channels. And they had a national launch in 2020, which was fantastic. So without further ado, I'm now going to introduce you to Margaret, the Diversity and Inclusion Specialist from Uniting. Margaret is a Diversity and Inclusion Specialist working at Uniting. She's responsible for the provision of expertise in the embedding of diversity and inclusion principles at Uniting. Her role includes challenging existing structures and supporting progressive change through influencing systemic improvement and coordinating special projects that build diversity and inclusion capability. She's passionate about tackling injustice and inequality, particularly for those most marginalised in our society, and is especially committed to actions resulting in improving the quality of life of refugees, people with a disability, Aboriginal and LGBTI communities. Margaret comes with a wide-ranging career in the public sector and non-government organisation leadership positions, and has extensive experience in developing strategies, policy development and program evaluation. So we're very lucky to have Margaret.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm the Diversity Inclusion Specialist at Uniting. I work in a small team, and my role is to oversee the execution of the Diversity and Inclusion Strategy. As a mainstream NGO, it's an absolute honour to be here today to share with you our story, our journey towards moving towards an inclusive organisation, and also really recognising that need to achieve executive buy-in. I'd like to thank the Centre for Cultural Diversity and Ageing in giving us this opportunity to share our story. And I'd now like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we meet on. And I'm here in Sydney on Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respect to elders both past and present. I extend that respect to everybody here in this forum, given the important work we collectively do to improve the quality of life for people, and especially our diverse elders. I've been asked to talk about holistic strategies for inclusive service delivery, but particularly how that relates to achieving executive and leadership buy-in, and relating that back to the three inclusive service standards. And I just want to ask you to please reflect on the questions that I've got here on the screen as they relate to each of those standards, but also what Lisa talked about earlier. Thanks, Lisa. That was a great presentation. And I can see the efforts made by the Centre in terms of looking at bringing to the forefront the importance of looking at the delivery of inclusive service standards. Now, what I won't be doing is to go through in great detail around service provision, but rather I'm just hoping you'll get a bit more of an idea of Uniting, a bit more of a flavour of what we're about, and our unique approach to diversity and inclusion and what that actually means around securing executive buy-in. And also I'll talk a little bit about the socialisation of our strategy. So for Uniting, our diversity and inclusion strategy aspiration is a place where everybody feels safe and confident to be themselves, where diversity is valued to co-create a better world. In other words, we are always welcoming you exactly as you are. So how powerful are these words? They really do carry a meaning that goes beyond mere tolerance, acceptance and celebration to a mindset of inclusion and belonging. And these are key words that Lisa alluded to earlier. But I think it's important not to get inclusion confused with tolerance. We look at it very much around inclusion involving ourselves, looking at changing our ways to ensure that you belong. So a little bit about Uniting. Who are we? We're the Services and Advocacy arm of the Uniting Church, and we're a very large NGO providing a range of different services from early learning, disability, right through to ageing, including end of life. And we also provide chaplaincy services. And we have a very strong commitment to social justice and advocacy, especially how it relates to the people that we're supporting. We employ around about 10,000 people. We've got about 2,500 volunteers, and we support every single week about 50,000 clients. So that's quite significant. And we also have a turnover of just under $1 billion a year. So when you look at all of that, yes, there are some advantages, but there's also a number of challenges and complexities. Diversity inclusion is embedded in our culture, and the Uniting Church is very much drawn from our belief system is very much drawn from the ethos of the Uniting Church, and our purpose is to inspire people, enliven communities and confront injustice. And it's pretty much what we try to do in everything that we work on. We have an ambition to honour our purpose and mission by understanding and engaging with our diverse communities and also our workforce. And pretty much it really is about making good business sense. And it is something that is very important around looking at how you build that culture to ensure that you are actually looking at the aspects of the business. And this really does mean how we engage with our minority groups and how that then relates to fostering creativity and innovation. Diversity inclusion is embedded in our brand, and Lisa did talk a little bit about that earlier, and I think it was standard 2. Now, this is really quite important. We have over the last, several years, but in particular the last couple of years, spent some time on advertising across railway stations and bus stations, as well as developing a range of collateral in terms of brochures. And the important thing here is that we've actually used the images of our own people in terms of employees, but also our clients. And part of that, I suppose, is that the world is actually seeing your thoughts and your feelings, and this is about your reputation, and it's how your competitors see you. Just some more examples. And diversity inclusion is embedded in our service delivery. We really look at reinforcing the person-centred and inclusive approach to the work that we do. And again, here you've got images of our own clients displayed on our website. We just a point here though, with the LGBTI inclusion, the images that you have here are photo stock. They're not of our own clients. And that's another conversation around looking at safe disclosure, and happy to talk about that at another time. But what's important, again, I suppose, is the importance of portraying to the public the faces of your diverse population. And we have this on our website. Diversity and inclusion is embedded in our practice, and we put the person at the centre of our service design and delivery. And this principle is integral in our service offerings across all of our range groups and diverse populations. So what I'd like to do now is to demonstrate that this is not just rhetoric. I'd like you to hear firsthand on what our clients think inclusion means to them.
咁呢度嘅感受都好似有個返屋企咁啦。
我嘅名叫
My name is Lo Wing Kit. I'm from Hong Kong and I'm 84 years of age. I like to come here because I'm home alone and I meet friends here and everyone is so nice to me and I'm very happy.
我叫歐少妮。
My name is Ao Siu Ling. I'm from Guangzhou, China, and I'm 85 years of age. The staff can speak our language, and we really feel like we are coming to a big family because whatever I feel like to talk or my thinking, I can tell the staff. So I'm really happy that we have this group.
Today we got some kids that we had out on a cultural camp quite a few months ago. It was a bit of a follow-up, but we do the cultural stuff because we see the value in the healing in the cultural stuff. What we find is, especially our young Indigenous kids, they're so proud to be Aboriginal, and the pride is there and it's so strong. But then what is it to be Aboriginal when our traditional cultural practices are very rare to come across? So we see tremendous healing for our young people in practicing a traditional culture, but in today's society as well. A lot of people out there, you're taught education, job, and that's your life. How about giving people a purpose to be in this world first?
No two people are the same. We all have unique strengths. We all have our own special fears. We all need a little help to navigate a life full of challenges, contradictions, and change. Jade needs wheels to access the world and make his invaluable contribution to the workforce. Andrew needs a cane so he can see around his world and embrace everything it offers. Susie needs exactly the right specialist so her son can live an ordinary life. Everyone has a right to a good life.
So where do you start? I think the first most important part is starting from tackling the question as why do you need to have a diversity inclusion strategy in the first place? For Uniting, we have a deep history and commitment to valuing inclusion and ensuring diversity is very much part of our service delivery, as well as engaging with our community and our clients and our workforce. And I'll stress again, it makes good business sense. Although we have diversity inclusion as part of our cultural DNA, we've also found a number of challenges that we need to address if we're going to be reaching and moving towards that next level of maturity. The first one is around intersectionality, and that was mentioned earlier by Lisa in her presentation. What we really do need to do here is look at greater intersectionality of experience and practice for our people. We need to build on the existing work that we've done with the LGBTI and CALD and Aboriginal groups in the past. We also need to look at greater consistency of inclusion practice across all of our locations. And that's quite a significant challenge for us given our size, but it can also be a challenge even if you're not a large organisation. We also need to be looking at greater staff and client authenticity through a focus on inclusive leaders, creating safe places and empowering our staff networks. And importantly, this is around how we look at achieving collective leadership and maturity. And part of that is really the whole process of evolution. But the biggest challenges we found were around intersectionality and authenticity. And I do go back again to some of the comments by Lisa around intersectionality. So part of this really is, for example, how can, if I'm a woman from a core background with a disability, then I'm all three of those identities. I'm not one of those identities. So I need to be actually treated in a way that actually respects my individuality, but also understands that I actually belong to all three of those identity groups. And what does happen in the past, organisations might focus on one particular group at the expense really of another group. And it is important that you actually recognise that individuals do belong to a number of different identity groups. What we've also, I suppose, part of the whole journey involved looking at our foundations, and what came with that was also, in terms of building the inclusive organisation, was identifying some of our challenges. So we did go through a process, quite a comprehensive process of diagnostics, and that involved a number of consultations, both internally and externally, with a number of key stakeholders, as well as undertaking analysis of our demographic data and looking at surveys, and pretty much putting all of that together to come up with identifying our key priorities. But along the way, we also found a number of challenges. I alluded to this earlier. Our size is a key challenge, given its complexity, and also the diversity inclusion priorities that were identified by each of our business areas were significantly different, and this varied from service area to service area, as well as geography. Our leaders, and particularly middle managers, are consistently recognised as critical conduits and levers for diversity inclusion success across all dimensions. And when I mean all dimensions, it's around recruitment, culture, learning, as well as data, but they're also the target of a number of other initiatives and campaigns. So basically they're competing for their time. And while the value of respect rates highly in Uniting, there's a strong sentiment that we lack the boldness and skills to openly and safely discuss D&I issues. And this is really what we talk about around walking on eggshells. So being challenged by actually raising these significant issues so we can actually move forward. And this is a significant challenge in reaching maturity. There's also a tension that we need to manage between elevating common messages of inclusion and responding to the unique experience and needs of each of the identity groups. And another important one is around diversity inclusion, maturity requiring evolution of our diversity and inclusion messages and narrative towards one of celebration of diversity and aspiration of belonging. So those terms are really key of actually moving along that journey, and including the words of safe places, belonging. And it also requires investment in diversity inclusion employees networks and a shift into visible and intentional inclusive leadership. So what I wanted to do here in this slide is just to show you across the equity continuum, and there was a slide that Lisa mentioned earlier. I think it was under Standard 2 around looking at the continuum. This is quite similar. What we did to assist us in terms of our journey of moving from celebration to inclusion and belonging is to go to each of our executives and ask them across this continuum, across these 5 phases, where do you think Uniting is rated at the moment? And very interestingly, most of them said that we're rating around the 2nd and 3rd phases, which is good in terms of diversity, but what we really do need to do is to get to that 5th phase. So part of that whole process of moving from 3, 4 and 5 is, again, how we move beyond celebrating an acceptance of difference, to valuing and leveraging that difference. And again, it really is about ensuring that the business case is deeply understood. And that's where we get growth, where we get person-centred practice and consistency of practice, and that stronger intersectionality lens. And another important part of this is how we look at shifting mindsets through leveraging the power of our networks. This is our employee networks, and to help them to share their stories of lived experience. And part of this whole change process is introspection. We know we don't always get it right, but it's our intent, which is why we need to listen to the hard truths of our people, our clients and communities, and strive for hope. But despite all the work that we've been doing that I described earlier, we're still not there yet. We're still pursuing inclusion. We're always working on it, and we need to move from our current state that you can see here on the slide to our future state. And this is about being more intentional And ensuring that we visibly weave in diversity and inclusion into everything we do. It is really quite an ambitious strategy, but one of the key challenges here for us to reach that level of maturity is for us to ensure that we address our Aboriginal Reconciliation Action Plan and have a deeper understanding and willingness to face the hard truths and move forward and engage all our leaders in the reality of the role that Uniting had played in relation to our work with Aboriginal communities. Now, what we have here, I suppose this slide here is really trying to demonstrate the great opportunities. So what we have been able to achieve is the appointment of 4 executive sponsors across our 4 priority groups. We have Aboriginal, LGBTI, CALD and disability networks, and part of their role collectively is to look at organisational change, identifying inclusion and diversity opportunities, looking at removing obstacles and any barriers that might and roadblocks that come through the work that we're doing. And also they have the authority to work on advocacy and other high-level work and opening the doors for our staff networks. They are all at different levels of maturity in relation to diversity and inclusion, but one thing they all have in common is their work together around collective decision-making, and that's absolutely pivotal for us to move across the continuum that I talked about earlier. I will provide some examples of the work later on in the presentation. We're also creating a space for our diverse voices and to be part of the actual process of identifying our priorities. And this slide here demonstrates our 4 diversity and inclusion network groups. We have the Aboriginal group, the cultural and linguistically diverse group, people with disability and LGBTI. And this is an opportunity really for all of the groups to have their voices heard, but importantly, it's the voice of our people who are actually informing the priorities that are being set and ensuring that our leaders are hearing with open hearts through the stories of our people what's absolutely important to them to ensure that we deliver on those priorities. This does relate back to our clients also. So through our people, we're able to capture the voices of our clients, and there are a number of other mechanisms that we have in place for that. But the key thing here really is that these priorities came from a summit that we held last October after the launch of our diversity inclusion strategy. We had over 200 people that came together, and through that whole process of consultation, we were able to identify these priorities. And basically what we're trying to do here is look at raising diversity inclusion awareness, build the capability of our people and shift the thinking so they become change markers. So from that, I suppose, this slide here really is a snapshot of the processes that we undertook to achieving strategic input and executive and leadership buy-in. The whole process took over 20 months. And from the initial concept of the idea of a diversity inclusion strategy to achieving executive org-wide KPIs. It all started in late 2019 when a small group was established to look at developing the diversity inclusion strategy, and I was part of that team. And we then formed a diversity inclusion working group of people from diverse voices as well as lived experience. And from that, we started the phase of exploration. That included the whole diagnostics and assessment that I talked about earlier and the consultations. We identified a whole lot of challenges along the way, but also opportunities. And importantly, and I'll stress the words again, is in terms of getting to that achieving or moving towards the trajectory of moving towards maturity, we needed to look at consistency of practice, intersectionality and authenticity. So they're 3 key words in terms of any formation of a strategy that I would advise that you consider, because they do help around looking at how you embark upon the whole process. We went through a whole lot of consultations. We also consulted with experts outside of the organisation. We reviewed a number of reports and did research. We compared our data with data sets available through the ABS. And what that did is help us to move and provide and present the evidence that went to the executive. Part of that also meant that we built on our existing strategy of our 10-year vision, as well as building on our reconciliation action plan. So all of this meant that we could go to the executive and the board with the evidence, with best practice, and able to achieve the endorsement and buy-in, which then led to our public launch. And then what followed from that, and public launch, what's critical about that is that you've got your leaders are then accountable. It's a public document, and you've got the board accountable as well as your leaders. From that, we were able to then establish our Diversity Inclusion Council, and then we were able to, with confidence and with the evidence, be able to produce org-wide KPIs endorsed by executive. And that took about 20 months. So depending on how big your organisation is and the size, you could expect that it could take, up to that length of time. Okay, so from that, I suppose we need to look at bringing the strategy to life. And part of that really is ensuring that we, along the way, look at the activities across the 7 pillars that you see here. So these 7 pillars form part of the focus of our strategic directions of the strategy. And from that, we've got our action plan. Underneath each of those pillars, there's a number of key activities and actions that we have developed, and a whole range of activities and initiatives. And that then relates to developing KPIs and an understanding of what success would look like. So let me give you some examples of that. The first one, which I've related back to the inclusive service standard number 1, is around our leadership commitment. So, but this one here on the screen is specifically around our ageing directorate. So ageing is our biggest business in Uniting. Close to 50% of our workforce work within ageing, and probably close to 40% of the 50% of people come from a core background. So there's some significant work that we need to do around supporting our core workforce. The first priority you see here is around scaling our Confident Communicator training program in residential aged care. That program was developed in direct response to the need to build the confidence of our frontline workers to engage in everyday conversations with our residents. It also touches on some of the issues around racism that's been experienced, and which is an important element, again, that Lisa alluded to earlier. We also need to look at our recruitment processes and to ensure that we recruit people that reflect the community that we're supporting. And also very important is about addressing and delivering on our ageing reconciliation action plan. So part of those, when you're looking at those priorities, on the right-hand side are the KPIs that have been developed that relate to and help us reach an understanding of what success will look like. We've also got another example. This is another example that I'm going to show here for our corporate area. All of our directorates have got D&I priorities, but what's important here with the corporate one is that we're wanting to develop and build our inclusive leaders and build the capabilities of our senior people and middle managers. We also want to ensure that we develop inclusive design and communication and build our employee networks. And importantly is ensuring that we get the data right. So the data needs to be right for us to then make those informed decisions. And again, each of those priorities have got KPIs attached to them, so we can actually measure success or otherwise. And another example of standard number one is around advocacy. And that really, we've been a strong supporter of all of these campaigns over the years. And, I'll touch on the racism one again that was spoken about by Lisa. That is a significant one, and it continues to be an issue. But we have been quite active in all of these campaigns and more. More recently, we're now engaged with Equality Australia around the Religious Freedom Bill and the impact it's having on our LGBTI community and workforce. In relation to standard number two, that's just, again, looking at targeted recruitment. I think we're all in the same boat around looking at the competitive nature and looking at the drivers for change when it comes to recruitment. People want to see themselves in the services that they're receiving, and that is really important that we do that. And we also know that inclusive and diverse teams are smarter, more creative, and they make better choices. So what we're trying to do here is to ensure that we respond to the individual needs and also the collective needs. The third standard in relation to, this is just a few examples, there's many more, around building capability, relates to the suite of educational tools that we have available on our learning management system, as well as our intranet and SharePoint site. We, across all of the four priority areas, we have a suite of different options available. And again, I suppose for any organisation that's wanting to look at opportunity of online learning, there are some options available from SBS that are not that expensive. Obviously, in addition to the amazing support provided from the Centre for Cultural Diversity and Ageing and the other PICACs across the nation. Okay, so inclusive communication is also key, absolutely key. It's not just about looking at translation of information, it's about accessibility to information. It's about ensuring that people can make informed decisions. So we have produced a number of translated materials and also produced our staff surveys as well as our award nomination forms in different languages for our employees. But one of the critical things here about producing brochures or information in language is the capability and the capacity of the provider to respond in language. So that's actually a very key consideration, which is something that we're grappling with at the moment, given the multiple of languages and cultures that we're dealing with at the moment. This is a visual that I wanted to show you because I think it's important. It really is about getting that visual right, looking at the right colours and ensuring you've got, again, your people portrayed in the advertising and the collateral that you develop. It's authentic and people can resonate with that. Okay, I suppose it's now getting close to the end and I'd just like to share with you a couple of thoughts around takeaways, again, specifically around the three standards, inclusive standards. What we've learnt a lot, but a lot of it is about our people, our clients and our communities and our purpose, and very much about how we work through that from the bottom up to the top down. We've learnt that we need to foster true engagement and consultation with diverse clients and workforce is absolutely pivotal and important to create all-inclusive safe workplaces. We want everybody to thrive. And sometimes it really does mean having those uncomfortable conversations about the hard truths. And I think the other important thing here is that that we need to have strong commitment and sponsorship from our executive and board that's visible, credible and intentional. Now, I'd like to share with you the voices of our own employees, and I'd like you to hear from them on what they think inclusion means to them.
My name is Jess Sinnott. I'm an early childhood facilitator for Uniting on the North Coast, and I am Aboriginal. I am Yuin and Wawan, so my people are from the South Coast and Northwest New South Wales, but I live here on Gumbaynggirr country.
So my name's Jo, and I'm the Quality Improvement Specialist for Youth, Homelessness and MSIC. I'm gay and genderqueer, and I'm a 1-million-star camper rather than a 5-star.
I'm Michael Mathias. I am the Environmental Sustainability Manager. I am a quadriplegic from a surfing accident 10 years ago, and I am a rugby fan and a Lego builder.
So my name is Nazish Ali, and I am the Personal Assistant and Projects Officer to Head of Operations, Sydney Northwest, Marilyn Jolly. I am an Australian Pakistani Muslim, and I am passionate about arts and craft, and I love to draw and paint.
Leaving no one behind and making sure that everybody can join in.
So it's being accepted for myself and not being seen as a man in a wheelchair. It's being seen as a co-worker and as a professional with an expertise in environmental management.
Valuing diversity and creating an environment where everyone has the opportunity to thrive, succeed, feel safe, respected, valued, and have a strong sense of belonging.
I'll be in a video conference and someone will just take an extra second before they use a pronoun or they describe me to someone else, and just to see that people have had that little pause and they're making an effort to do that, it's extremely appreciated by me, and they probably don't realise how much it's appreciated, but it really, really is. It's a big deal to see someone else making that effort.
There's been many times where I felt included, and there's a big stuff where when I came back from my accident, the office had been adapted for my needs, like a special desk and a automatic door, but it's all those small things, whether it's somebody opening up a door for me or picking up something that I've dropped on the floor, or even just going to somebody asking me about my thoughts about a suitable Christmas luncheon venue. And it's those things that make you feel included.
I also have an awesome supervisor, and she backs me up in pretty much everything that I have to say, whether it's good or bad. She rolls with the punches and she's very supportive of me. Even if sometimes the things that I say aren't what we want to hear, but they need to be said. Some of these conversations are sometimes uncomfortable, but they need to be said, and she knows that, and so does everybody in my team. So for me, it's been awesome. Discrimination exists everywhere, and it's something that as humans we have to actually acknowledge to get past, and sometimes for some people it can be quite difficult to do that. People will discriminate no matter what, but if we can work together to acknowledge that we are doing these things and look at how we can change it, I think Uniting's on the right path with that.
I think we can create a place where it fully accepts uniqueness.
Could be where everyone is feeling safe, supported, welcomed for who they really are without any fear. There's respect, there's opportunity for everyone. Everyone's included. Managers making a conscious effort to include and ensure everyone from all diverse groups is generally included and supported.
I think we've really got to shift from that accepting people as they are, because I still think that doesn't really, it's like, well, we'll accept you for your authentic self. Well, cheers. Well, I think we could do better than that as an organisation. I think we can do way better, and we can, that culture of we actually want diversity. We're seeking difference, and we're valuing that.
What makes me proud to be part of Uniting is the fact that I can be proud to be who I am. My voice is heard, and I can be black, loud and proud. And, you know, that just makes me really proud to be part of the Uniting team. And that, yeah, my voice is heard.
I'd now like to end the presentation with going back to what I started with, and it's about our diversity, inclusion, aspiration, a place where everyone feels safe and confident to be themselves, where diversity is valued to co-create a better world. And I must say, I just love that video. Okay, thank you, everybody. I really hope in the next 10 years that we're not having this conversation about diversity inclusion, because it'll be embedded into what we do, but we're not there yet, and we're moving along that journey. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Margaret, for that wonderful presentation and really seeing the values of diversity inclusion played out within an organisation. I was really impressed to see a number of different moving parts to the story around commitment from the board level to a number of networks and consultations had with the local community and internally within the organisation. And then, of course, you know, transferring all that knowledge into a diversity inclusion strategy with particular KPIs, diversity sponsors within the executive level, and of course communication and publicity and communicating the message through the videos that you've shown. And I just think it's an amazing example. And I think you did say that if anyone did want to sort of speak to you, they can as well. That peer-to-peer learning. So yeah, thank you, Margaret, so much.
Thank you, Lisa. Look, if anybody would like to have any further any discussion with me out of this session, please just email through at the Diversity Inclusion Uniting email address. I'm very happy to talk to anybody. Really, what I've just presented here is just a snapshot of the whole process. Depending on the organisation, where you're at around that journey and how big you are and small you are and a whole range of other factors, your journey will be different. But at the end of the day, it's still the same intent around where you need to go.
Absolutely. And the fact that it's taken 20 months to come to where you were with the strategy, and then obviously hasn't ended there. There's been monitoring, improvement and actually meeting the KPIs. So it's a lot of people involved. You know, you had to get buy-in from a lot of different people in the organisation. So congratulations, Margaret. I think this could probably be recognised internationally. So we do have some people who are from Canada in the space today. So let's have a think about how it should be celebrated on a global scale. We do have some questions from the audience. We had one around what are some of the barriers to diversity inclusion in the workplace, and how do you get more diverse leaders into leadership roles?
People want to see themselves in the leaders. The first thing, I suppose, going back is ensuring that you've got the demographic profiling and data right, and that's really key. And one of the things, I suppose, people look around and they go, I cannot see diverse. I can't see myself in the leadership of the organisation. But to do that, you need to get the evidence right. So if you need to look at where the influences lie, and the influences do lie in leadership. And leaders want evidence. Leaders want data. Leaders want to know that it's about the business case. And it does go back to, I suppose, the moral obligation, back to looking at the laws. And it goes back to, I suppose, the mission and purpose of any organisation. One of the biggest challenges we have at the moment is around our Aboriginal diversity. It's a significant challenge. We have a rate of employing Aboriginal people and the same rate of people and a high rate of people leaving. So why are people coming? Why are they staying? And why are they leaving? So those challenges, I suppose, we need to look at. Part of that is actually looking at the introspection aspect of it. and looking at and having those hard truths that I spoke about earlier. You do need to tackle those questions. You do really need to ensure that the leaders are very conversant around the specific issues in relation to Indigenous or Aboriginal recruitment and what that actually means when you're employing Aboriginal people. Same thing goes when you're looking at the issues around discrimination and particular cultural groups. One of the difficulties we have when it comes to recruiting from other groups, LGBTI and disability, is the lack of safety around disclosing LGBTI status or disability. So there are a number of challenges. Sometimes it's about the system, sometimes it's about the lack of understanding or awareness of people who are working through and there's sort of touch points. Along the touch points are when you look at the journey of people coming into the organisation, your onboarding, your recruitment, your advertising, the actual interview itself. So there's a range of different sort of factors there. We also have significant challenges around unconscious bias, and looking at how we need to build the capabilities of our leaders so they are actually aware and there is a shift in mindset and they are paving the way and leading when it comes to inclusive practice. And just using the word inclusive practice is another term, I suppose, that we need to ensure that we articulate and ensure that it's understood. And I suppose in terms of our size, of course, because we're so big, and we do have a number of different levels of capabilities across the organisation. So when we're looking at a narrative for the general workforce, we need to ensure that the language and our messaging will be understood. So, moving away from jargon and other sort of terminologies to ensure that message is there. The other bit, I think the challenge is that you can have all the training. You can have lots of training, you can have lots of training online, but people are time poor and they're competing for time. So it's those bite-sized, small, snackable, what we call snackable training that helps to build D&I awareness.
Wonderful, Margaret. Some great points there, and you can see the wealth of experience that you've had around being on the ground, sort of dealing with a lot of different stories, conversations, understanding people's work life sort of rhythms. And I know that there's one organisation who does a diversity info snack, and what they do is they send that diversity info snack, which is a snapshot into it's a communication, and it's just like little bits of information. So I thought that was an interesting one to sort of, like you said, bite-sized pieces and sort of getting that message through in a consistent way, which is one of your values, and an authentic way as well. And I think that the video that you had at the end where you interviewed your staff was really interesting because it seemed like people were able to express their authentic self around some of the things around discrimination and racism in the workplace and having those really challenging conversations as well. And I think that sometimes by talking about these really complex issues like racism or discrimination, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're at fault of it. It's a social ism, it's an ism, whether it's sexism, racism, ableism, everyone can work together to sort of support that issue. So it's not necessarily anyone's fault per se. I think it's more around the system. Because sometimes we do come across conversations of people feeling perhaps guilty or not sure how to have the conversations. And I think it's really important to stress that it's a systemic issue that we're thinking of and how we can sort of start to be more conscious of it. And
that's right. And that's a really key thing actually, Lisa, because it's about calling it out. And it doesn't mean that anybody's at fault. But I think once you do get to the point of acknowledging, yes, racism does exist, then it's about, well, okay, what are we going to do about it? We also need to recognise that we're on a journey and that whole, and, inclusion, do you ever really reach inclusion? One is that we're in an evolving process and community expectations will continue to change. And it was, look, I'll be honest with you, when I started working and doing some deep dives and focus groups and what was confronted, it was quite confronting around what came through to me. But then there was an opportunity for a response, an opportunity to actually look at, okay, well, what do? We need to respond to the issues of and the impact, the psychological well-being of our employees and our clients are being affected.
A majority of the workforce is culturally and linguistically and faith diverse, and as well, so supporting the workforce as well, and not sort of applying a one-size-fits-all around even sort of things like multi-faith calendars or multicultural calendars, Chinese New Year, Islamic New Year, Eid, festivals, Christian festivals, different types of Christianity, being able to understand that people don't always connect with a certain Roman calendar. Calendar.
Exactly.
We've got I think I heard the other day of an Aboriginal community leader mentioning that in some communities they don't have 4 seasons, they have more than 4 seasons. So, so many different life views and different ideologies. And when we start to have those intimate conversations, we get to learn ourselves. We benefit from the beautiful diversity of our community as well. In terms of the Centre for Cultural Diversity and Asia's Inclusive Service Standards templates and resources, they are available on our website. You are all now able to access our online self-reflective portal. So we will send you a link to that portal half an hour after this webinar series. We have tip sheets and templates around KPIs or diversity strategies and staff surveys. Of course, our inclusive service standards themselves, videos and discussion guides, and our online training modules, which can be incorporated into your SCORM files through your LMS system. So let us know if you'd like them to be incorporated into your systems, and some planning tools. We also have our practice guides, so you can see them on our website, which is sort of just different topics relating to inclusive practice, like digital inclusion, how to get data and demographics, accessing interpreters, and we're just about to do one, I think, around co-design, so watch the space. Again, our portal, so there's a link there. I won't go into that again, but it does have a self-assessment tool to see where you're at in your inclusive practice journey in aged care. Tips and templates and consumer feedback forms in 12 languages, diversity inclusion staff strategy and new sample diversity inclusion policy, and a tip sheet for each of our performance measures. And again, this is part of our webinar series. So this is the 6th webinar we've done this year. Thank you everyone for those who have attended the other webinars. They are all available on our website under training. The PowerPoint presentations and the recordings will be available. But in terms of live webinars moving forward, we'll have our linking inclusive practice to aged care quality standards, and that's in collaboration with the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission. That's been a popular topic around how do we link the concept of inclusive practice to the standards when auditors come in. And of course, it's not just a compliance mindset, it needs to be proactive and progressive. Applying a diversity lens to consumer-directed care with Dale Park, a diversity consultant, and of course, inclusive consumer feedback with AMCS case manager and access and support leader, Sanisha Krisoff. So we are also going to be running other webinars in 2022, so watch the space. And they are all for free with unlimited registration. And you're all invited to our communities of practice, which is having ongoing conversations around what we just spoke about, but also more like small group conversations, which you'll be linked to a diversity coach and to help you understand where you are on your inclusive practice journey. Are you in the beginning? Do you need help with a certain topic? Do you just want to need help just to start the process, for example? Or do you want to be linked to other people to learn from each other? Do you need particular resources, for example? So that's all for free. Each organisation can register 2 leaders from their organisation to attend the communities of practice, and the link will be sent to your email if you would like to register. So thank you so much again, everyone, for your attention today in today's webinar series. And thank you again, Margaret, for your amazing expertise and dedication to social justice. And we hope that we can continue the conversations. Thank you, everyone, for your time, and have a lovely afternoon.